Ahlan wa sahlan. Right now we're going to talk about the grammar of present tense verb forms in formal Arabic. And once again, the present tense in Arabic we call al-mudari'a. If you watched our first video on how to conjugate present tense verbs, you noticed that the formal conjugations had some variation sometime, and that's sort of what we're going to talk about right now, is the variation. In fact, the present tense can take three forms: al-marfu'a, al-mansub, wal-majzoom. Now, as you can see in this chart, the differences are fairly minor. Most of them, it's just a difference in the vowel that comes on the end of the verb, and probably the biggest difference is in the conjugations that take a final noon, anti, antum, hum. In the marfu'a and in mansub and majzoom, they lose their noon. It's important, I'm going to reiterate, that these are formal constructions. We don't have to worry about any of this when we're speaking colloquial Arabic. This is strictly a Fusha grammar thing. And in fact, except in really formal settings like speeches given by heads of state or reading holy texts, things like that, we're typically not going to hear these vowels in regular speech. Even if people are speaking Fusha, for example, in a conversation on television, in an interview setting, perhaps, a lot of the time it's sort of something that that just isn't used, right? It's not necessary, vitally necessary for comprehension, but as an Arabic learner, it's an important part of knowing how to deliver formal speech, and especially if we're listening to a prepared text like a newscast, it might come in handy, right? We need to be able to recognize these forms. So as I said, Dhamma we hear on marfu'a for most of these, or a final noon. And then that final vowel is replaced by fatha for mansub, or just a sukoon, right? No vowel sound at all for majzoom. And we lose the noon, again, on both of these. Now, marfu'a is the default present tense form, right? If we have no other feature in our sentence that's going to necessitate using another verb form, mansub or majzoom, then we're going to use marfu'a. In a simple sentence like, I study Arabic, right? If we wanted to say it with all of our vowels, we would say adrusu al-Arabiyya, right? Or she works in a bank. Ta'amalu fi bank. She works in a bank. So we could include that dhamma if for some reason we were speaking very, very formally. Mansub is a form that we see usually because we're using a connecting particle that requires it. These include words like an, which we use to connect verbs, right? It sort of functions as the to between two verbs that we hear in English, right? He likes to go, she wants to see, and we'll have some examples. Also the li, meaning in order to, right? I'm going to the library to study. And also after lan, which is the particle that we're going to use for negating the future. So for example, if I want to say she likes to read, right? We can use an to connect those two verbs. So we're going to say she likes tuhibbu, and here we're using marfu'a, right? That default form. But then we use an to connect those two verbs. She likes to read, taqra. And then we're going to use the mansub form. We're just going to put that little fatha on the end as kind of a decoration. Or li, I'm going to the library to study. أذهب إلى المكتبة لأدرس. But if we're going to fully vocalize these sentences, أذهب إلى المكتبة مرفوعة, because we have no reason to change things. إلى المكتبة لأدرس, but we have this li, so I know that أدرس is going to be منصوب. Or if we wanted, for example, to say I'm not going to the library to study, instead we would say لن أذهب. Also mansub, right, because it follows this particle lan. Finally, majzoom, we most often see it and hear it after the particle lam, which we use to negate the past or to create a negative past tense sense in formal Arabic. You'll notice that with lan here, even though we're talking about the future, I will not go to the library to study, it's conjugated very much like a present tense verb, even though we're discussing something involving the future. So similarly with lam, if I want to say I didn't go to the library, for example, I would say lam أذهب إلى المكتبة. And here, since it follows lam, it would have a sukun. It would be in majzoom form, right? So once again, marfu'a, default form if we have no other reason. Mansub, often we see it after an or li or lan. Majzoom, we often see this form after lam. Before we finish up, I want to point out that these different verb forms can seem kind of intimidating when they're presented all at once like this, and it can be intimidating to feel like you need to memorize them all, right? Especially without the context of a grammatical function to work on, right? It can almost be a chicken and egg thing, right? I'm uncomfortable using an to connect verbs because I don't have a handle on the mansub, but I don't really know the mansub too well because I haven't really focused on connecting verbs yet. So we have separate videos on using most of these different particles. We're going to have a video on an, and we have a video on lan and lam, and we're going to reiterate that we need to use these specific verb forms. So in order to keep your mental load manageable, focus on associating a grammatical function, a grammatical task with these forms when they require them, right? And you can come back and look at this as a reference if you want to compare and contrast, look at the differences and sort of give yourself that breadth of understanding. But as you're focusing on specific ways to say specific things, just remember to associate specific verb forms, specific conjugations, or specific forms, I should say, of al-mudari'a with the grammatical task that requires them, and that will keep things manageable for you.